Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Joanna Hynd and I work for the McArthur Public Library. Today we are going to be talking about famous diaries. This is the third part in a four-part series about journaling, and I want to give a shout out to the McArthur Community Archive. They have a COVID-19 community archive on our website. If you scroll down about 3/4 of the way down our website page, you will see a COVID-19 community archive with brackets that says tell your story, and you can click on that and submit your stories, images, oral histories, interviews, journal entries, drawings, any kind of format. It's a joint project of the Biddeford Cultural and Heritage Center, the Biddeford Historical Society, and the McArthur Public Library. There is a very handy video tutorial by our very own Renee, and that is visible if you click on the Tell Your Story brackets. You'll see the tutorial right there on how to contribute. And if you don't live in Biddeford, and you are tuning in from afar, you might want to look into what your public library is doing, because there are a number of different places that are collecting first-person accounts of what life is like during the COVID-19 pandemic. So yeah, I wanted to quickly go into the different formats you can watch this on. If you're watching on YouTube, hello, welcome. And if you're listening in on the Anchor app or any of their platforms, hello, welcome. It's on anchor.fm/McArthur-library if you want to listen and give your eyes a break if you are watching on YouTube. And I will include a link down below if you want to click there. So why do we write? And why are there famous diaries? We write to record something, to remember something, to create primary sources of famous moments in history. Lewis and Clark, they recorded their whole expedition just to keep track of what they were doing and what they found. Darwin and other naturalists on ships would keep very detailed accounts of the animals and plants that they came into contact with. And if you just look up naturalist diaries, you can see all kinds of different things. I remember once going to a museum and seeing an entire exhibit of glass flowers, and it never really occurred to me before you could really preserve flowers in any form of refrigeration across the seas, or take photographs. You would have to illustrate, and creating glass flowers was apparently a trade that you could get very skilled at and make a lot of money at. So it's kind of cool to see like all these glass flowers being created. But yeah, illustrating in diaries, I feel like have always gone pretty hand in hand. Why do people write? For self-discovery. I keep being reminded of some of the first lessons I had in college about historical documents, and the Confessions of St. Augustine were something that we briefly had to kind of dive into. It's widely considered the first Western autobiography, and it's kind of interesting. I remember being surprised at the humanity and the universal themes, despite the fact that it's very heavily Christian. There are certain things that are just universal. So, why do we write? We write to clear our mind. Sometimes if you get a really good stream of consciousness going, you can find some things about yourself that you never discovered before. Marcel Proust wrote his In Search of Lost Time, formerly called In Remembrance of Things Past. sort of like as a diary. It was more of a memoir, but it's definitely fictionalized, and very heavily influenced uh, Anna Eastnin and a bunch of other famous diarists in writing in that style where you kind of meander through your thoughts. And of course, Virginia Woolf wrote very much in stream of consciousness, both in her novels and in her diaries. Another reason why we write is to gather material for other writing projects. No, Virginia Woolf did this. Sylvia Plath heavily stole from her own journals when writing The Bell Jar. Just to try to get some things down on paper so you can revisit it and rework it into something else. So why do we read other people's diaries? And I think this definitely plays back into discovering things about the human condition. We read to discover what is universal, what is true about all of us. And I've been recently revisiting A Diary of a Young Girl by Anna Frank. And I was just very fascinated when revisiting this. I didn't realize quite how famous this was, and it might be just because, I was born in the 80s, so I was a little bit late to the party in being introduced to Anne Frank and her work. To me, it reminded me of like a little bit of a zine or a social media post when she starts writing little captions next to her photographs and kind of poking fun at herself. It reminded me of like reading a Facebook caption, or I think it's delightful. And the introduction is by Eleanor Roosevelt, which I thought was very compelling. And I'm just going to read a little part of it because I love Eleanor Roosevelt. So this is from the introduction. Anne's diary makes poignantly clear the ultimate shining nobility of that spirit. Despite the horror and the humiliation of their daily lives, these people never gave up. Anne herself, and most of all, it is her portrait which emerges so vividly and so appealingly from this book. Matured very rapidly in these 2 years, the crucial years from 13 to 15, in which change is so swift and so difficult for every young girl. Sustained by her warmth and her wit, her intelligence, and the rich resources of her inner life, Anne wrote and thought much of the time about things which very sensitive and talented adolescents without the threat of death will write. Her relations with her parents, her developing self-awareness, the problems of growing up, these are the thoughts and expressions of a young girl living under extraordinary conditions, and for this reason, her diary tells us much about ourselves and about our own children. And for this reason, too, I felt how close we all are to Anne's experience, how very much involved we are in her short life and in the entire world. So yeah, that's a lot of what I was talking about the human condition, finding what is universal, what is innate, what is draws us all together. It was really interesting to come to the parts of her diary where she talks about missing nature so much. Me living in the city, it's very hard to socially distance, so I find myself not going outside very, very much at all, although I find that I'm very, very lucky to be able to open my windows. I can't imagine being in the secret annex and having no access to sunlight. But she writes very, very poignantly, especially for being 13, 14 years old. She has her 15th birthday right before they get discovered. And I find myself forgetting how young she is. It's pretty amazing. So yeah, I was like looking up some statistics. Close to 35 million copies sold. It's been in the top 10 on and off for years and years. Translated into, I can't remember how many languages, originally written in Dutch. I feel kind of embarrassed. I thought that Dutch and German were the same, but I was mistaken. I guess Dutch is more similar to English than German is. So, yeah, it's interesting to think about what she would have been doing if, or what people would have been doing if the internet was available in 1918 during the Spanish flu pandemic. I find myself looking up different resources. The Smithsonian has some amazing articles about the 1918 pandemic. I saw an interview with a couple of people who lived through it, who are still alive, and they're like 107 years old. It's pretty incredible. And different things you can learn from history, and it makes it more it gives more inspiration to continue to write and journal right now. Even in the article that I was reading, though, it said, just write what comes to you, just write what seems important to you, write what makes sense for you. And that's going to be a more genuine, more useful primary source document someday, if you choose to share it or if it gets shared someday. It's pretty interesting learning about primary sources, and diaries are always right up there next to letters and memoirs that are written in a way that are just about the subject. Otherwise, they end up being too it can cover too much, and it's important to like reel it in and keep it to what you know. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me. And next week we'll have our part 4 of the podcast. And I hope you will join me then for our final sign off. I hope you are doing so well. Stay healthy, stay safe, and we will see you next week. Thank you.